countries, the challenges are significant, as we all know. Regulations that don't exist, or ambiguous to say the least. Logistical challenges which can sometimes make getting medicines to the people who need them quite literally a battle. Financial implications, and then sometimes just a lack of awareness that EAPs are even an option for these patients in these regions.
The good news is we've got the right people in the room to tackle this with us today. We've got Cassie bringing the Cardiff and the CV, Chris bringing the Voice of Patients and Advocacy, and myself and Catherine bringing the Perspective of the Service Provider as well. We definitely haven't got all of the answers, but we just want today to be a super open, practical discussion. What's working, what are the barriers, and what can we all do differently if we actually want to achieve equity in these regions. Firstly, I'll allow our to introduce themselves. Catherine, start with you.
I'm Catherine Parry, I'm the Senior Commercial Manager for EAP Pharma, working in the Medicines Access Division.
I'm Chris Hendriksz, and I'm just passionate about patients in low and middle income countries.
I'm Cassandra Slader, and I'm the Global Head of Managed Access Programs at UCB, which is a mid-sized pharma focusing on neurology and immunology.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie. I'm Project Manager at EAP Pharma, working alongside Catherine in our Medicines Access Division. This is my fourth Operationalise EAP conference now, so it's really great to see lots of familiar faces, lots of new ones as well. And we're really pleased to have Chris and Cassie join us down today. Okay, so with that, we can jump in. Cassie, my first question is for you. That's okay. So I think from our side, we really don't tend to see many programs opened up in LMICs because companies aren't really sure how to approach them or because there aren't any commercial plans in those markets. But it always feels like a missed opportunity because I think actually one of the patient needs in these regions is still so great. When you're assessing whether to include LMICs in your programs at UCB, what are typically the biggest challenges or considerations that come up?
So when we start planning our managed access programs at UCB, we think from a truly global perspective. So we don't limit ourselves to just Europe or just US. In our initial planning, which really starts 60 months before launch, but then gets very focused around 36 months before launch, we work through the list of 195 countries in the world, and we segment those countries based on what we think our future plans will be. So is it a country where we're going to register, and do we expect reimbursement? And typically the lower middle income countries fall into the bucket of we probably won't register, at least not in our first or second wave of countries, and we probably also won't have reimbursement. UCB also only has an affiliate presence in around 30 to 36 countries, and again, the lower middle income countries are ones where we don't have necessarily a UCB presence. So you might think, well, if you've not got a physical presence, you have no plan to register and no plan to get reimbursement, why would you even be considering those countries? And the reason is that in those countries, the unmet medical need will be at least equivalent to what it is in Europe and the US. It could be even higher because maybe there are less alternative therapies available. And so from an ethical perspective, we don't want patients being underserved just because they fall outside of our treatment. But specifically then, what we have to take in special focus around is how do we partner with those healthcare systems? And we think about three key aspects in terms of partnering with the healthcare system. How can we ensure that the patients are able to be diagnosed? So if there's a specific diagnostic test, is that available in those countries? If there's specific safety monitoring requirements, can that be met by the healthcare system, or would we have to do something in addition? And then lastly, are there any funding mechanisms in order to be able to support those patients who are unlikely to be able to afford treatment out of pocket? So we make then some difficult decisions. If there's no safety monitoring available and that's critical for our drug, then we won't open the program in that country. But if we believe that patients can be diagnosed, safely monitored, and there are some funding mechanisms available, then we will go ahead and, when we're setting up the program, be ready to accept requests from those countries.
Thanks, Cass, that's really insightful. Question to you, Chris. From a patient and community perspective, what do you hear most often from patients and physicians in these regions about why access through EAPs feels so out of reach for them?
It's a really fascinating, good question, and I said I'll bring some data. Because actually this survey in my countries, and I had a response from 10 countries in sub-Saharan Africa on EAPs and what do they think. So interesting, just for you. So 6 of the countries responded they've never heard about an EAP, and they've never known how to access it. No idea. 2 of the countries said they've got an easy access program, but they are so complex and time consuming that they don't bother with them anymore. 1 country said, it's a breeze. We've got a program, it works, we've got a system, it's fantastic, get us more. And then there is 1 country, which I think is really important for people to know, that's it. Yes, we've got an early access program, you can get to it, but what people don't realize is once the patient is accepted, the patients need to pay for the drug, they need to pay for all of their healthcare. The insurance or national system does not cover any healthcare if they go onto an EAP. So it's better for patients not to be in the EAP.
Yeah.
And that's what we're dealing with on a regular basis. And then the frustration from the patients are, we're speaking to our doctors, we hear there are EAPs, how can you access it? And then the response is, why bother? Because this is what we need to do.
Yeah. It's really the financial implications
Yes.
of that. It's just out of reach, isn't it? Yes, unaffordable.
Absolutely, yes.
Chris, can you share which country said it was a breeze?
Yes, you will be surprised. So Tanzania is actually the country that said it was a breeze. Really easy to do. And I can tell you, it's the country I was the most surprised about, because we did some work with them, we did some charitable access there, and since that the country's just flourished. The last time I spoke to them, they had a rare disease centre set up, they now have 20 clinicians working in the system. I just thought, how do you get there from a country which, but it's just the willingness to do it and trying to make a difference.
Anyone?
No, I think that's
Well, it's actually really overpromised yesterday.
yeah, no, we'll get there.
Fantastic, thank you, Chris. A question to you, Cassie. We've previously spoken, and you've mentioned that one of the challenges inside pharma at UCB is sometimes not knowing which internal teams to actually engage with. Who are the right people? Is it market access, etc.? We heard yesterday of one of the presentations, just the numerous, the amount of departments that need to be really involved in decision making with regards to an EAP. So can you tell us how UCB have approached this and any frameworks that you put in place to actually try and navigate around?
Sure. So we have a managed access program committee, which is a cross-functional team. It includes clinical development, medical affairs, market access, supply chain, patient engagement, and safety. And when we're discussing will we have a managed access program or not, all of those stakeholders are involved. I would say for low and middle income countries, supply is one of the critical aspects. Often because of the location of those countries, we may or may not have the right stability data to support the drug shipping in those countries, so being aware of that up front is critical. And then the other key stakeholder is market access, and very specifically the pricing departments within market access. So in our program framework, if there's a country where we will not register and we will not try for reimbursement, then in those countries we implement a charge for program. It's not at a profit as per se to the company, it has a very low margin. But being able to negotiate with the market access colleagues around setting a price that is adjusted for low and middle income countries is critical for the success of programs. As Chris has just pointed out, you can have a program, but if it's something that patients can't afford, then has it been worth all of the energy to set it up? So being very knowledgeable about international reference pricing, timing of pricing in different regions of the world and the implications that has to the broader business, really getting close to the finance colleagues and understanding what is the cost of goods, what overheads do you need to factor in, is something that I would highly recommend. What we have done is to build a bottom-up model with the cost of goods, all the other inputs that come when you run these programs, and then agreeing internally on what margin do we need to add on top in order then to ensure that the program is cost neutral to the company, is the approach that we've taken, and that has allowed us to then move into other geographies that historically the company wouldn't. So Asia Pacific, Middle East, and some geographies in Latin America where we've not had a presence before.
I mean, this is really a question that you probably can't answer because obviously different factors will determine it, but the average length of time to actually from the initial idea of setting up a program in a multi-million country to actually coming to fruition, is that?
Well, what we are doing now is doing them in parallel to Europe and US. So when we have to set a price for our managed access programs, which often is triggered by the fact that we're going to have an AAP in France, then we go to the pricing committee with the price for Europe or France, but also then the price that we will use in the low and middle income countries. So instead of doing everything sequentially, it's the same board, it's the same decision makers, we try to come with the full package. So we've tried to shorten the gap. Historically though, of course, most of the programs were set up with Europe and US in mind, and then we've had to sequentially expand, but we're trying to change that paradigm.
Fantastic progress there.
Can I just add on the logistics? I think it'll be important for people. So simple things like getting a sample into the laboratory takes anything from 12 days is the average to get a sample to the laboratory to 120 days. That's how long it takes to get a sample into the laboratory. So the one thing which is fascinating is the will for people to fix things. And a lot of you may or may not know there's a fantastic program in sub-Saharan Africa on sickle cell. They actually deliver blood by drone. So actually the blood samples has been delivered by drone. But of course that solves the problem, and now that there are drugs in the space, people are starting to use the same drone complex to move the drug around, and it allows a cold chain. So I think there are some solutions in there, but it's the whole idea of look at what's on the ground and how can you tag on rather than completely start from the beginning.
Just to add on to that from our side as a service provider as well, typically by the time a program reaches us, the decision about what countries to include in scopes already been made, whereas I think sometimes as well if we would maybe have been part of those earlier internal discussions, and we also might be able to help provide some practical options and maybe could have kept some of those points on the table. As well. Next question for both of you, if that's okay. This is a big question. Chris, maybe we can start with you. Who should bear the cost for EAPs and LMICs? Do you think pharma should shoulder more of this, or are there any other alternative funding options that you've seen that could play a role as well?
Yeah, it's a great and challenging question, and it's not one we should shy away from. So I think my view on these is that firstly, I think all of us should have some kind of social responsibility, and that's pharma as well. So I think each and every pharma company should have a social responsibility where they give something away for free. That's just in general. So I think that's a starting point of where we can get to help the EAPs on the go. And then you've got to have different strategies. So you need to look at both the sustainability. So you may find that pharma may need to put the first push to get things going in, but it's all about co-developing and making sure you take your partners along with you from the beginning and saying that, listen, we're going to start doing this part of the EAP. We're going to start doing it. And ways to do this would be building a relationship, because we've all become so linked to devices that we have no relationships anymore. And I think for a pharma company, if you start thinking about an EAP program and an LMIC, your first place to start is with diagnostics, because there's no point having a program when you don't have patients. And you really need to know the epidemiology of what you have, and then you need to know, is that patient similar to the patient for which you've developed the drug in the clinical trial? They may be very different, so the outcomes may be very different. but you should see it as an opportunity. And when I speak to pharma, they always tell me, but we never get biomarkers as a primary endpoint. We'd love to have that. Well, when you set up your EAPs and LMIC, run your biomarker program there. Start getting the data to support your other markers. I said to somebody else yesterday, you always have to remember that we as patients, clinicians, the LMICs are the remoras and pharma is the shelf. So you can devour everything and take the best parts of everything, but unless you support us, the fungus is going to kill you. So start working together, bear some of the cost, but don't take responsibility for funding away from governments. So, and that's really important on the sustainability. And if I want to use your leverage, if I want to speak to the DOH and the government in an LMIC, I get a no-show. If a pharma company goes, there may be benefit. So use that leverage to open the door in the LMICs. You may be easier to get that leverage just to start the conversation, but keep everybody together. So I think it's really getting everybody to co-fund. But yes, for a start, I think pharma should shoulder more of the initial. Should it continue? No, because we need to look at sustainability, otherwise there's no point.
I think the approach that we have taken is that we can't implement the same model that we would in other countries. And on Tuesday I shared in the workshop around paid for programs, how we calculate sustainability for our programs. And what we can do then for low and middle income countries is reduce essentially the cost to the patients or the cost to the healthcare system by considering that this is not a for-profit setup, and that, as Chris has said, initially we will need to shoulder more of the burden. I think also one of the challenges that we can encounter is that because we don't have colleagues on the ground, we then need to find other ways to connect with the physicians who come from those countries. But I think from my perspective, one of the upsides of COVID was that physicians really became much more aware of clinical practice outside of their own country. They had to network with physicians that maybe they would never have networked with before. So many colleagues in Europe then established connections with physicians in China and in other countries in Asia. So I feel like physicians became much more internationally and globally aware, and therefore it is easier potentially than in the past for physicians to already have a network of colleagues outside of their country. So then they become aware sooner of medical innovation, which also then means that they perhaps are attending international congresses, and that's where we can connect with them and make them aware that yes, the drug is not registered in your country, but we do have a mechanism. And that's how we've really targeted specific geographies where we would open our programs. I think also through patient engagement, patient advocacy networks, patients are also incredibly well networked across the world, and language barriers that existed before are no longer a barrier when you have Google Translate or you have an AI model that allows you to translate very quickly. So having people with siloed knowledge will probably be less common, and in that way then organically awareness of the programs can also grow. Back to your point that some physicians are not aware that programs exist, I think we'll see that slowly changing over time.
And I think that's an educational opportunity for pharma, because even what is an EAP? How does it function? What is the process of it? And these are things which are just really, and it's simple things that can be done, just that people understand they are there. And then I've heard about all of your wonderful platforms and everybody's building. Give us access to those, that we can actually see which clinical trials can patients actually go to. Because what we're seeing now in my space, in the rare disease space, pharma's looking for naive patients. Because everybody is on the treatment, they're now looking for naive patients, because all the gene-related therapies needs naive patients. well, we've got those patients, but help us build from the beginning. How are we going to make this sustainable long term? Don't just fly our patients in, fly them back and drop them, because we see a lot of that happening, unfortunately.
Thank you, Chris. Moving on, that moves on very nicely to physicians, just a little bit more about that, and then patient advocacy groups as well. So question to you, Chris. You've spoken before about the importance of finding physicians in the multiple income countries who will go above and beyond, and we've spoken about some of the factors as to why complex, lack of understanding, etc. But moving forward, how do we identify and support those champions? How do we make them work?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And you have to build champions. That's the real thing, because they don't just happen. You can't have champions until you have a diagnosis. So the first things to do is you need to find also who's the key person in the area. So I'm going to share some trade secrets here. You do a little bit of ego stroking, and we all know that. So you usually go to the most prominent physician in the country and say, we're really grateful, you do fantastic work and everything. We've got this new program, but it's going to take a lot of time, and we know you're incredibly busy. Show us a young physician who can start working with us and run the program. And usually they have a sidekick or somebody they would want to use. So you usually then find that that person see the opportunity, I can become the next expert in this field. So you find that person and they start building. And then you just bring in multidisciplinary teams. You have to bring in different specialties, because it's the pool everybody fishes in, and unless you share the yields, it's not going to work. So start looking at who's the people. If you've got a rare disease person coming into a specific area, I'm going to just pick an area which is well known to us. It's Fabry disease, but it overlaps with other cardiac conditions. So if I start setting up a rare disease service for Fabry disease, I need to make sure I'm going to take work away from the cardiologist. So rather than that, I need to speak to them and bring them into my program. So that's the first thing, is you've got to try and get people to work together on multiple programs. The other thing is, the patient organizations are usually connected to the physicians, which are your champions of the future, because they pay nothing. And people whose main focus is earning is not going to be connected mostly to the patient organizations. So speak to the patient organizations and speak to groups like us. So I'm not the physician, but I can tell you, if you tell me this is the country, like I say, I've got doctors in 50 countries in the world, if you tell me I've got a rare disease program, now this doctor may have no knowledge of your disease, but he's got the principles of what a rare disease is. We can build in next to your program and say, how do we take this forward? How do we get this person to expand and bring in more and more? Like I say, the example we've had from Tanzania, I was blown away to find a clinician who just started and building. So I do think it's really important to find them, but speak to the people on the ground. And the people which there's a change at the moment, and we all talk about Gen Z and how bad they are, but actually the Gen Zs are the best for rare diseases because they want to work for purpose. So find your Gen Zs and engage with them, because they really will be your champions going forward. So they're the people you want to, and speak to the patient groups.
Just leading on from this, you've just spoken about patient groups and also kind of the lack of awareness in these regions. What role do you think they can play in trying to raise awareness about EAPs? And then how do you think pharma and service providers such as ourselves can support with that?
Oh, absolutely. So I think, to me, I'm very biased, but I believe the patient organisation is the centre of everything, because they represent the patient, the view of the patient, and they are also the ethical gatekeepers for patients, because our patients are very easily exploited because they're desperate. So I think getting your patient organisations on board very early on, and when there is not a patient organisation, help us find one. Let's make one. And don't get caught up into the old thing of disease-specific patient organisations. There's nothing wrong with working with a rare disease patient group, and then as time goes on and there is more people interested, have subgroups and things like that. That's not the important thing. The other thing is that the patient organisations are usually more likely to go to the conferences and things than my doctors, because they can't get time off and they can't afford it. So they're more likely to come back from conference with the knowledge, this is the new drug, this is what's happening in the field. So they're very good at sharing the information then. And then they will also know what is actually appropriate and possible on the ground. And that's why I think they're really important people. And what they will be able to do excuse me, is connect you and start canvassing, help with the training, help with saying, this is what an EAP should look like. And we will be the gatekeepers. We will make sure it's fair, but also be honest and transparent. Like we said yesterday, from the word go, there's going to be an EAP, this is the cap. It's not because it's financial or supply or doesn't matter, but be honest and say, this is going to be our cap. After this cap, this is how we believe we can take it forward. So I do think that's the critical role.
Some of our referrals for patients from low and middle income countries have come through the fact that the patient organisations are very well networked. So somebody starting a patient organisation in Asia Pacific often reaches out to another organisation that exists in Europe or the US, and through that connection they become aware of the expanded access or managed access program, and that's how we've also then been able to identify and serve additional patients.
Thanks, guys. And definitely from our conversations with patient groups as well, awareness is probably the biggest gap. And I think even when we do have programs that are open in those countries, like you said, Chris, physicians have no idea they exist, they're just not sure how to access them. Or like you said, they've tried to access them but just find the process way too complicated. So I think we've just tried to simplify the enrolment process as much as we possibly can, which I think really helps. But when we are connecting with patient groups, we're trying to do exactly that, raise awareness on what EAPs even are, how they work, what they can do for patients, and then exactly that, how they can access them.
And I think just context again, when you're in a clinic in most of these countries where I've been to, you as a single doctor has got 80 patients to see today. Now you can think how much time will you have to do that? How much time have you got to do an EAP and things like that? It's going to be in your own time, which those who care will do, but we've got to make it as easy as possible for them. Don't put unrealistic requirements onto the clinical outcome measures. Don't say, yes, you can have an EAP, but we need an MRI every 6 months, because these patients have to pay for it. They can't do it. So, but what are the tools we can use? And again, speak to the people on the ground. There will be tools, and there will be surrogates which you can use.
So I'm just conscious of time, we've got just over 4 minutes left. So final question to Cassie, Chris, some take-home messages, I suppose, for the audience. We've spoken a lot about service providers, patient groups, pharma. So looking at solutions, in your opinion, are there any solutions of how we can work together more effectively in low and middle income countries to actually design EAPs and get the people who need them? That question was a bit random, wasn't it?
Well, I think from my perspective, the first step is not to assume that you can't do the program in low and middle income countries. It takes a lot of lobbying internally, definitely, especially in companies where maybe you don't have an internal footprint in those countries. You might have very low internal understanding of what is and isn't possible. But the first step is to really take a global perspective when planning your programs, and then maybe you can't start every country at the same time, but sequentially move broader and broader in terms of your geographies.
Yeah, so I won't go through them in detail because of time. I've got a few keywords which I can give to you. Firstly is co-design from the start, patient organisation, localize, work on the ground, not outside. Share your innovation, share your risks. We can all learn from that. Be creative in the funding models. I've given some examples, but there are ways that you can do it, so don't make that a barrier. And lastly, be transparent, have metrics, and have data. We can't function without those, so help us to get there.
And I think just from our side as well, what really makes a difference if you are using a service provider for your programs is just, again, to involve us in those discussions as early as you can as well with pharma and patient groups, because I think we can then probably also help point out some of the challenges that we've dealt with before as well, really early on, we can actually help kind of shape and build your programs that actually work for Christmas as well.
And celebrate success. Let's
Right.
share the successes we have rather than the failures, and that's why Tanzania was my nice new year.
Thank you all. See Rachel standing up and that's yeah, less than 2 minutes left. So I just want to say thank you very much, Cass and Chris and Kate, for such an exciting conversation and discussion about security reporting.